stay at the beachfront Hard Rock Hotel and Casino Punta Cana at the easternmost tip of the Dominican Republic. This luxury beach paradise features 13 pools, 9 restaurants, 24/7 room service, and more. Or you could win a luxury 4-night all-inclusive stay at the Unico 2087 Hotel Riviera Maya in Mexico. Escape from the everyday and enjoy stunning white sand beaches, 3 unique pools, locally inspired cocktails and cuisines, local art, and more. Don't miss your chance to win these dream getaways. Enter today at WTTW.com/sweepstakes.
Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
Whatever your style, a Walter E. Smith designer can deliver. We're not just one look, we're your look. And if this isn't it, we'll find it. Our design services are free and based on your budget. Still not it? Our clients deserve the very best, and our designers aren't done until you love it. Not it?
You dream it, we design it, until it's it. Meet with a Smith designer today at your home or in our showroom.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by David and Luann Glowers.
Resistance was a necessity.
On Making Black America, organizing for change, and Black Life, Black Joy.
These spaces that allow us to feel good about ourselves and good in the world.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW.
I'm Sister Mary Lou Rydell, Maryknoll's sister, Gloria Tamayo. You're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, Democrats fight to hold a slight majority in Congress as midterms rapidly approach. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin joins us for a one-on-one with the issues.
The Chicago Board of Elections has a new precinct map, but it might mean a new polling place for many Chicago voters.
A new federal push to reclassify contract workers as employees, what that could mean for gig workers.
Cook County is accepting applications for the nation's largest publicly funded guaranteed income pilot. Find out what that program is promising. Hundreds of downtown apartments hit the market. That and more business news from Cranes.
We're here to help them in their language.
Suburban libraries are welcoming Spanish-speaking Latinos with open arms and open books. And a colorful new exhibition looks at the many uses of monochromatic artwork in contemporary art. But first, some of today's top stories. Healthcare workers will soon be under fewer COVID-19 requirements. Governor J.B. Pritzker announces he is removing weekly testing requirements for unvaccinated workers in healthcare facilities and long-term care centers. The state-issued vaccine mandate for healthcare workers is also being removed. And finally, face coverings will no longer be required in all healthcare facilities, but are recommended in facilities in areas of high community transmission. The governor's office says the state's healthcare workers and residents have done better with vaccines, boosters, and masking, allowing the state to scale back some healthcare requirements in line with the CDC. The governor also says COVID-19 is on its way to being endemic, like the flu. Some Southside residents you might recognize took advantage of early voting. Former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama cast their ballots today at an early vote site in Chicago. 2 sites in downtown are open for in-person early voting at the Chicago Board of Elections Super Site and the Chicago Board of Elections office. Early voting sites in all 50 wards will start a week from today on October 24th. And we'll talk more about election preparations in just a moment. Some healthcare professionals are sounding alarms about Illinois Supreme Court candidates that they say pose a threat to reproductive freedoms. They warn that candidates Mark Curran and Michael Burke running for Illinois Supreme Court, if elected, would restrict access to reproductive health care.
The potential election of anti-abortion conservative candidates is frightening, as it will jeopardize my ability to safely care for the patients, delay patients' abilities to get needed medications and treatment, and will harm our community. We have seen what has happened at the federal court level and many of our surrounding states. We cannot let that happen here in Illinois. There's just too much at stake.
And Mark Curran is running for Illinois Supreme Court in the 2nd District against Elizabeth Rochford in the November election. Incumbent Michael Burke is running in the 3rd District against Mary Kay O'Brien.
And coming up in the program with new precinct map, what does that mean for your polling place?
But first, the war in Europe, Venezuelan migrants in Chicago, and the battle over gun laws. Illinois Senior Senator Dick Durbin gives us his take on all that and more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Critical midterm elections that will decide who controls Congress are only 3 weeks away. Among the things on voters' minds are inflation, immigration, crime, democracy, and abortion. And an intensifying war in Ukraine has many worried about nuclear threats. Now, here to give us his perspective on these issues and more is Illinois Senior Senator Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin, welcome to our new studio. Good to see you in person for the first time in many years. You're the co-chair of the Senate's Ukraine caucus. I want to start with Ukraine. Russia, as you know, has stepped up civilian attacks in places like Kiev in the last couple of weeks. What more can the U.S. and the West do to prevent further atrocity?
Well, the good news is this. The Putin effort has really stalled from a domestic point of view. When the mayor of Moscow says stop grabbing young men on the street and putting them in the army, is an indication that public support in Russia is not strong. And so Putin doesn't have the troops to turn to. The Ukrainians have been amazing with their courage and their resilience. It's terrible that he's attacking civilian centers, but I think the momentum is on the side of the Ukrainians.
As such, President Putin might feel more backed into a corner. He's made nuclear threats. President Biden has said this is the scariest level since the Bay of Pigs right now. How do you assess the possibility of Putin turning to nuclear weapons?
Of course we take it seriously. You can't dismiss that as just rhetoric. And his notion, or at least some suggest, oh, they'll just be tactical battlefield weapons. You know, radiation is not contained that easily. And so any threat of that nature could reach into the NATO alliance and trip the section which calls for collective response. I'm sure that Putin doesn't want that to occur. I think President Biden was correct in making it clear that we're taking this very seriously and watching every move he makes. It's a very serious situation.
As such, it's prompted some in your party, but more in the Republican Party, to push Ukraine to sit down at the negotiating table where Russia might keep some of the territory that it illegally took. Is that an option that's on the table?
It's only an option if the Ukrainians want it to be an option. Imagine this. Their homes have been invaded without any provocation. They have witnessed devastation and killing and war crimes, the likes of which we've not seen in decades. And for us to dictate politically what they should do next, I think is completely wrong. We support them. They have to be dominant in their effort against Putin, and they've shown us they have the courage to do it. Let's not undercut them.
I want to move to the topic of immigration. The Biden administration is now using a COVID public health rule that was used under the Trump administrations to expel Venezuelan asylum seekers who came here by any other means than flying and arriving at airports. Most of the recent asylum seekers in Chicago are Venezuelan. Your reaction to this rule change?
Well, I've met them. I've sat down with the migrants that came off the buses one-on-one to speak to 4 different groups, to ask how they got here and what were the circumstances. It's a tragic situation that they've gone through. They were desperate, risked their lives and their families' lives to be here. And in many circumstances, they were swept up and promised that if they take a bus ride, everything would be just fine, which, of course, they were being misled by the governors of Texas and Arizona and Florida in that circumstance. I think what President Biden is trying to do is to resolve a situation where we have Venezuela as a country that we warn Americans don't travel to it. It's so dangerous. It's little wonder that people living there are looking for some sort of a refuge. But we need to really sit down and look at our immigration system in its entirety. What we have at the border now is a signal that what we are on the books or immigration is inadequate for the 21st century.
So expelling Venezuelan asylum seekers right now in the present moment, the right move or the wrong move?
It depends on the circumstances for each. I'm not going to say that each and every one of them is qualified for asylum status, but they make desperate moves to come here to this country. They risk their lives, and we should be very careful not to turn someone back into harm's way if we can avoid it.
Speaking of a broader immigration proposal, you seemed cautiously optimistic the last time we spoke a few months ago that something might be brought to the floor. Obviously, you've been working on the DREAM Act for 20 years. Are you still cautiously optimistic, perhaps in the lame duck session?
I hope in the lame duck session we can take this issue up. The thing that held me back recently is all the rhetoric about immigration that's being used as part of this campaign by the Republicans. I mean, they're suggesting that all of the folks coming across the border are carrying bags of fentanyl with them, and they're murderers and they're rapists. You know, by and large, that is just a fiction. It's a political fiction they're using to their advantage. I'm hoping after the election that there'll be enough Republicans willing to sit down and deal with DACA, for example, which should be done, TPS, temporary protected status, and try to come up with an approach at the border that makes sense and discourages people from risking their lives to come here.
In the acute moment, you have about 3,400 Venezuelans that have risked their lives to come here that are in the Chicago area. A lot of local leaders have asked for more federal funding to help with the assistance of these arrivals. Is there more federal funding on the way?
The Democrats were pushing for it, the Republicans resisted. And the reason is obvious. They want as much chaos as possible. They want to write their narrative about what these immigrants mean to us. And here's the simple reality. These immigrants are coming here not as part of some conniving scheme, but in an effort to find a job and make enough money to survive or send money back home to other relatives and family. They'll take any job, as usual, immigrants do. And I've seen so many employers say to me, we can use them, we need them in nursing homes, we need them in restaurants, we need them in so many different places. We do need these employees. These are not jobs Americans are seeking.
And this is one of many issues on voters' minds in the midterms, very crucial midterms. You have the plum assignment as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a job you'll only keep if the Senate retains a 50-50 split or improves on that. What are the odds that that happens?
50-50?
50-50 or improving on those numbers?
Well, I'm just saying I think they're 50-50.
Oh,
in other words, I couldn't tell you who has an advantage any given day. The differences in many of these races are 1 and 2 points. That can shift overnight for reasons we can't even explain. So we have 5 or 6 states we're watching with very close eyes because there are a lot of good people whose futures are at stake. We have a possibility of picking up a number of states. John Fetterman, a candidate lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, was a guest of mine several weeks ago here in Chicago.
And there's a lot of noise about his ability to serve, his recovery from a stroke. What do you make of that? What did you observe?
You know, I can tell you, by observation, thank goodness, not personal experience, but I've seen stroke victims. Mark Kirk returned after a year and did a great job as a senator. We had situations with Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, Ben Lujan of New Mexico. In their 40s, both of my colleagues had strokes this year, and they're still functioning at full speed. I think John Fetterman's ready to come and handle this job if the voters give him that opportunity. I have no question about his ability to do the job.
Another big issue weighing on voters' minds, inflation right now. Republicans have sought to tie Democrats as responsible for inflation. Is that something that's going to hurt the party's re-election?
Of course
chances?
It will. I mean, inflation is a problem for every family, and we better look at it realistically. It is totally unfair to blame Joe Biden for the inflation. Do you blame him for 10% inflation in Germany, 10% in Great Britain, 6% in Canada? Coming out of the COVID crisis, many of these economies overheated, and they didn't have a supply chain to produce the goods and services people wanted, which led to inflation. Now, the Fed's trying to use interest rates to bring this back under control, but it's not a precise science. It's not a fine-tuning situation. So I think we can move in the right direction. We should. But to blame Biden for it is just, I think, an opportunism.
And another issue Republicans are seeking to pin on Democrats, especially here in Illinois with the SAFE-T Act, is crime. Do Democrats in some of these contested Senate races or other races have a message on crime?
They want to use this message because they like to brand my party as soft on crime. The fact is, when it comes to defunding police, we don't stand for that. We want to fund the police, but make sure they're adequately trained and armed to do their job effectively, legally, and morally constitutionally. You know, these are what the bottom line is. We need police. You want to dial 911, you want somebody to answer who's competent and can keep your family safe. Both parties agree on that. But they're trying to make some contrast here that just doesn't exist.
And again, in this upcoming election, you have numerous candidates for high offices in their states that are election deniers and have not pledged to accept the results of their own election should they lose. How might that play out on election day and beyond?
Well, you know, that's almost traitorous as I see it. When you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution, you swear to uphold and defend the peaceful transition that an election brings in America. I saw this Republican candidate for governor in Arizona refuse to accept the fact that she might lose. Dana Bash kept asking her, and she wouldn't even answer the question. That is totally irresponsible. It's the big lie of Donald Trump, and we should reject all candidates to take a position.
And then that leads to worries about 2024. Now, there is a bipartisan bill, the Electoral Vote Count Act, or would shore up the Electoral Vote Count Act so that a vice president isn't put in the position that Mike Pence was, where a vice president would have that kind of authority. Is this something that would pass in lame duck?
I think there's a chance. I'm a co-sponsor of that. I worked on that bill. It isn't all that we wanted, but it's all that we can achieve on a bipartisan basis. The lead sponsors on the bill basically said, let's wait until after the election to call it. I hope we get it done. It should be done.
Another issue, especially after Highland Park assault weapons ban, is that something that could be taken up in lame duck? It obviously has no support from Republicans.
Well, it could have some. I hope it has some. But look at the bottom line here. Does anybody really want to argue to me that the Founding Fathers envisioned in the Second Amendment a legal requirement for 18-year-olds to be able to buy an assault weapon, a military weapon, which was used up in Highland Park? That's a ridiculous conclusion. It doesn't reflect the reality of those who want to take the Second Amendment seriously.
All right, Senator Dick Durbin, no shortage of issues here in crunch time in the midterm elections. We appreciate you joining us in our brand new studio.
Thanks, Paris.
And now to Brandis and what you can expect when voting in person in Chicago. Brandis.
In Paris, Election Day is less than 30 days away. And for some Chicago voters, your polling place may not be the same as it was in the last election. The Chicago Board of Elections has had to draw new precinct maps, but some folks are crying foul, saying the new map is a form of voter suppression. Joining us now to talk about the new map, worker shortage, and what you can expect this election season is Max Bever, Director of Public Information for the Chicago Board of Elections. Max, welcome back to Chicago tonight. So in the new map of voting precincts, precincts in Chicago's 50 wards have gone down from 2,069 to 1,290. Tell us why the change.
Sure. So a couple of factors there is that this is a process that happens every 10 years in Chicago related to redistricting and the new city ward map. That map was passed May of this year, a little bit later than it usually is. And once that passed, the Chicago Board of Elections does have to redistrict, put people in their new wards ahead of this year is August 30th. That's the deadlines for petitions for running for the next election, the February 2023 municipal election, as well as us reacting to a new state law that is raising the amount of registered voters within precincts. So for a city the size of Chicago, that raised the amount of voters within a precinct to 1,800, to getting around close to that number. So we had a big process to overtake within the last 3 months, got that done ahead of deadline in August, and now we appreciate the opportunity to talk to voters about what they can expect coming up for November 8th.
So does fewer precincts mean fewer polling places?
Not necessarily. Wherever we can, the Chicago Board of Elections tries to have one precinct per polling place. However, for the last few election cycles, that hasn't been the case. For the June 28th primary election, there was 1,043 physical polling place locations that was serving over 2,069 precincts. So this upcoming election, due to these recent changes, we now have 946 physical polling places that'll be servicing 1,290 precincts. And that's a number that's important because that means that you have more physical polling locations that are serving just a single precinct, but it will allow us to have easier staffing of election judges. We've had an election judge shortage for the last 3 election cycles. That's something that we're facing head on with these changes.
So does, obviously there will be changes before the November election. Of course, you mentioned the municipal election in February. Can voters expect a big change then as well, or probably the same?
The same. We have gotten most of the changes out of the way ahead of February, too. But the biggest change that voters can see is related to two things. Their precinct polling place on Election Day, as well as the amount of election judges that are needed in Chicago. So that election judge shortage that I was talking about, for previous elections with the amount of precincts that we had, we needed 10,345 election judges for Election Day. That's a hard number to hit, and that's been not just for the Chicago Board of Elections, but election agencies across our state and across the country. Now with this precinct consolidation, we need 6,450 election judges to make sure that every precinct is fully staffed. That's 5 election judges per precinct. So we're already close to that target, but we're looking to overstaff this year, especially related to any questions about redistricting or sending people who've gone to the wrong polling place to their correct location, as well as just any other assistance on Election Day.
What are some of the challenges that you all are experiencing in recruiting those election workers? Because in the last few elections, obviously COVID has been a big barrier, but also worker safety being an issue in recent elections.
Both the things that you just described, concerns about serving as a poll worker or an election official in 2022. But the truth is that it's a very long day to be an election judge. You are getting to your location around 4 a.m. You'll be there till past 8 p.m. And election judges, while they are paid, it's $230 to be an election judge and up to $450 to be an election coordinator for elections in Chicago. This isn't a mandatory position, so it's not like jury duty. We do rely on a system of volunteers and people who are available to work on Tuesdays for that long of a day, which tends to run for a lot of senior citizens or a lot of young people. But as time has gone by, it's been harder and harder to find people who can serve and want to serve for that day.
Now, some aldermen, candidates for mayor, have said that this reduction in the precincts is a form of voter suppression. Is there less access, or they're saying that if that is the case, if there's less access to polling places or confusion about where to go vote, how does the board respond to that?
So we have a relatively same number of physical polling locations than we did for the last June 28th primary, just less precincts now. So we do hope that there's improvements in communicating to voters and staffing those type of sites moving forward. But the biggest change, and this happens not just related to this precinct consolidation, but to what happens in Chicago every 10 years, voters finding themselves within new ward boundaries, is that their boundaries are changing, which means that their polling places are changing. So it is about nearly half of Chicago voters ahead of November 8th will have a different polling place location than they did just in this last June 28th primary election, which is why we're urging voters to go to our website at chicagoelections.gov, go to your voter information page, enter your information, you'll get your assigned precinct polling location, your sample ballot, all the information you need for Election Day, or to give us a call. We know that there's many older voters out there that don't necessarily use website. Can give us a call at 312-269-7900 to find that. And by the way, this is in addition to every voter's opportunity to early vote or to vote by mail. And so that's another reason why this precinct consolidation is taking place, is that there's a good number of our polling places on Election Day, if we're looking at the numbers from June 28th, that saw about 100 voters all day long. So between the hours of 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., 100 voters showing up. We've got the capacities at those polling places, so if there's double that amount or triple that amount, even quadruple that amount, 400 voters going to those precinct polling places on Election Day, we've got the staff now ready to meet those voters.
And to that point, if you've got fewer precincts, can people expect longer lines when voting in person?
Given again that we're not seeing very long lines at most precinct polling places for Election Day, I would say for estimated extra time for voters could possibly be between like 5 to 10 minutes. Again, we want voting to be as easy and as accessible and as quick for voters as possible. But being in a line for 5 minutes, we hope that that doesn't deter any additional voters. But again, you've got your early voting options, or you've got your voting by mail options at home that you can also do if you're not planning on voting on Election Day on November 8th.
And speaking of early voting, it's already opened at your downtown locations, open citywide next week. Even some vote-by-mail ballots are starting to return. And we know that some famous Chicagoans took advantage of early voting earlier today. Are you noticing any voting patterns so far with regards to which option people are going for?
Yes, we're already seeing a healthier turnout than we did in the last primary election. Now, that's generally the case with gubernatorial years comparatively to presidential years. There's going to be somewhat of a lower turnout. Unfortunately, just this last June 28th primary, we saw the second lowest voter turnout than we've seen in Chicago. But those numbers are improving for this upcoming general election. We've already had over 2,000 people early vote. Early voting opened at 2 locations downtown Chicago on October 7th. All 50 ward early voting locations will be open this next Monday on October 24th. That's generally when we see those early voting numbers really start to increase. But where we do see the most engagement right now is our vote by mail numbers. We've already had over 11,000 ballots returned, and we have just over 180,000 vote by mail applications for this next election. That's the second highest number, with the highest being nearly 500,000 for the November 2020 election. Now, given that that was in the middle of the pandemic and given concerns about the post office and other, that makes sense, but we're seeing very high engagement with vote by mail, and that looks like it's here to stay.
And we're less than 30 days until go time. Max Bever, Chicago Board of Elections, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brandis.
Up next, a look at the many uses of color in contemporary art. That's right after this.
Our culture is vibrant, it's rich, it's fun.
We try to focus on, hey, let me help you. This is what Chicago is. This is Little Village.
There's much more ahead on the program, including a new federal rule that could have big implications for gig workers like rideshare drivers and tutors. But first, fall color has a different look in Hyde Park these days. That's where a new art show is filled with vivid colors and dark tones as well. Producer Mark Vitale visits the Smart Museum on the University of Chicago campus, which is currently saturated with monochromatic modern art.
One of the first works you'll see is a triptych by Claire Zeisler, the really amazing Chicago textile artist. And she made 3 panels, one red, one yellow, one blue. They're the exuberant, almost ponytail falls of yarn that stretch out of them.
Next, there is a gallery of artwork in yellow and gold, and a room full of red, and no small amount of black and white and everything in between. The curators call the show Monochrome Multitudes.
What is the most challenging art that you could possibly encounter? Probably abstract art, and probably art made from one color or art made from very strange materials. It's the type of art that a lot of people will say, including my students, either I can do this too, or why is this art?
So many of these artists are not using color neutrally. They're questioning what color might mean. They're questioning its values. They're questioning how it's used fundamentally in art. One of the big ideas behind this exhibition is really to expand the ways we think about the monochrome.
All these artists think about color in very, very different ways. Of course, in all of these different historical and cultural contexts, colors and monochromy mean very, very different things.
Amanda Williams of Chicago painted condemned houses in Englewood in the bright colors that are meant to attract consumers. Williams was recently named a 2022 MacArthur Fellow. Also in the exhibition, filmmaker Derek Jarman's Blue, which reflects his eyesight as he was dying of an AIDS-related illness. And there is an acoustic work that brings a monotone to the monochrome. The move toward exploring one color is often associated with 20th century male artists from the United States.
And we wanted to complicate that. We wanted to include women, we wanted to include artists of color, we wanted to include artists from around the world because they've all engaged in discourses around the monochrome.
We're a university museum, and we're the museum at the University of Chicago, and I've always felt that that makes us a little bit different and gives us an incredible opportunity to engage the immense expertise that we have on campus here. So close to 40 of the labels have been written by faculty members across campus, and not just us boring art historians, but a mathematician, an astrophysicist, a legal historian, and those types of perspectives that are usually never brought into museums.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
The show Monochrome Multitudes is at the Smart Museum on the campus of the University of Chicago until January 8th, and it is open to the public. There's more to see on our website, including a recent interview with the artist and newly minted MacArthur Fellow Amanda Williams of Chicago. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Walgreens goes after customer data to try and expand its business. That and more from Cranes. Gig workers like rideshare drivers could soon be classified as full employees under a new proposal. What that could mean for the gig economy. Cook County is now accepting applications for the nation's largest publicly funded guaranteed income pilot. Find out if you're eligible.
We're here to help them in their language.
And how Suburban libraries are welcoming Spanish-speaking Latinos with open arms and open books. But first, some more of today's top stories. 2 teenagers were among the 8 people killed by gun violence over the weekend in Chicago. A 13-year-old and a 17-year-old boy were killed hours apart between late Friday and early Saturday morning. Police say the 13-year-old was found on a bench with a gunshot wound to the head in the West Ridge neighborhood. And just after midnight on Saturday, a 17-year-old boy was shot and killed in the Back of the Yards neighborhood. Police say 31 people were shot in 26 separate incidents Friday night through Sunday. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is assisting people affected by severe storms and floods in downstate St. Clair County. Residents there experienced major floods and storms in late July. President Joe Biden approved the major disaster declaration for the state of Illinois. This allows for federal funding to help residents get grants for things like temporary housing and home repairs and low-cost loans to cover uninsured property losses. You may have missed it, but if you looked out your window this morning, you might have seen a little sneak preview of winter. The first snowflakes of the season hit the ground at O'Hare Airport, according to the National Weather Service. The snowfall evaded our cameras by this afternoon when we were at the lakefront. Snowflakes at O'Hare were barely noticeable as well, but the National Weather Service says the trace of snow is officially recorded as the first observed snowfall of this season. The average date for the first significant snowfall of an inch or more is December 7th, and I think we can wait until at least then before we see that. And now to Brandis for some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. 2 Chicago high-rises hit the market, leaving more than 700 downtown apartments up for sale. A loan tied to a distressed hotel in River North sells at a steep discount. And with a new marketing ploy, Walgreens hopes to be America's go-to corner drugstore once again. Here with all that and more, and to go behind the headlines is Crane's Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. And welcome back. So, as we mentioned at the top, another 2 downtown high-rises have hit the market. What does this mean for apartment deals and landlords in Chicago's central business district?
Well, I think it means that investors may be getting over their fear of the twin terrors of interest rate hikes and potential property tax hikes in the downtown area. You know, the apartment market, at least from a big investor perspective, has been very sluggish downtown this year, which is surprising given the fact that occupancy rates are at record levels downtown, as are rents. But it's possible that we're seeing some loosening up happening in the past few weeks. There are several properties that have come on the market that Cranes has covered, but just today came word that 2 more are hitting the downtown market. One in Streeterville, above the Lowe's Hotel on North Water Street. About 398 apartments are in that parcel. And another in the Loop at Lake and Wells. That's about a 329-unit building. These joined a handful of others that are now on the market and are finding interest. So it'll be very interesting to watch what the values are that these properties can capture after what's been otherwise a sluggish year.
So in other real estate news, a New York investment firm has bought the loan tied to River North's Hotel Felix, and at a pretty good discount. How much and how did it get to this point, Ann?
Yeah, Monarch Capital is the name of the outfit that paid close to $29 million to pick up the loan on this property. That's roughly 2/3 of the original balance on this loan, Brandis. And this comes 2 years after the mortgage trustee filed a foreclosure lawsuit on this property. And as you can imagine, like a lot of downtown hotels, the Hotel Felix was really caught in the COVID downdraft. But now the new holder of this loan is betting on an upswing in the market, and actually recent data indicates they might be right. They're just in a position to take advantage of it, whereas the earlier owners of the property just weren't.
So lastly, the country's second biggest drugstore chain, chasing down customers it lost during COVID. How big of a loss has it been for Walgreens, and what's the retailer's strategy here?
Well, they've reported in their recent quarterly earnings a significant loss in foot traffic and market share, especially to rivals online. So if you've filled a prescription at Walgreens in the past, if you've had a credit account with them, coupon codes, or if you've even gotten a vaccine at Walgreens, you can expect that very soon, the next time you're on your computer, you're going to be hearing from Walgreens. They are planning a significant uptick in their digital marketing efforts, direct digital marketing. And this is all designed to try to recapture some of that lost business that took place when people weren't going out of their houses and were instead ordering prescriptions and other types of goods that Walgreens sells at the front of the store online.
Okay, that's Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Thanks so much, Ann.
Thank you, Brandis.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Brandis, gig workers like rideshare drivers and delivery people are a key part of the modern U.S. economy. Most of those workers are contracted, meaning they're not full employees. But the Biden administration is proposing a rule making it harder to classify workers as contractual, with the hope it gives more people full employment status and the security, benefits, and wages that go along. And joining us are J.C. Muhammad, driver and volunteer with the Chicago Gig Alliance, Allison Dixon, senior instructor at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign School of Labor and Employment Relations, and Lenny Sanchez, organizer with Justice for App Workers. Welcome all of you here to Chicago tonight. First of all, Allison Dixon, what would this proposed rule change do?
In effect, this rule change would really just revert to what are considered to be a long-standing interpretation of the economic reality factors that affect gig work. So during the Trump administration, these rules were rescinded. But what this rule would do is really kind of look at the larger picture of what gig workers are facing. So the control they have over their working conditions, the investment that they make in their vehicles, and their opportunity and loss factors. And so it would be kind of taking a much more multifaceted approach to making these kind of determinations.
And basically, as I understand, the rule is saying that if someone is economically dependent on a company, it means that they should be an employee and not a contractual employee. So what is the standard for being economically dependent as it pertains to this rule, Allison Dixon?
So being economically dependent means that this is your livelihood, that you consider this a primary source of your income, that this is not just casual work as has been, communicated kind of as a larger story about the narrative about gig work. And, really looking at like the dependence of that individual worker's livelihood and their family's livelihood on this employment.
Lenny Sanchez, would this necessarily be good news for a gig worker, say a rideshare driver?
So it's great intentions of the president to want to take on this battle and address the issues that the rideshare community has. There is a concern, though, here is that if this classification were to be a reality, is how the applications would respond. And it would affect the flexibility and whatnot that makes gig work so attractive for the drivers right now to continue to do. Directly speaking with Uber and Lyft, because as part of IDG, I'm the director of the Independent Drivers Guild, as a member of the Justice for App Workers, JFA, we have meetings with Uber and Lyft, and they have told us that if this classification were to pass, that they would create a schedule, but not in the traditional sense that you would be familiar with. It would be a block of hours that a drivers would all have to race to reserve before they would run out. And once these reservations run out, they would not be able to log in. So for people that do this full time, which is about half of the workers, there's over 100,000 in the state, those workers that have invested and need the flexibility would lose this. So there is some concern.
What about that, J.C. Muhammad, the law of unintended consequences here, that this rule change might lead to less flexibility for rideshare drivers and other gig workers?
I think that's a real concern. We've talked to drivers, thousands of drivers over the last several years, and but really the main thing that they're concerned about is diminishing pay, personal safety, due process when confronted with deactivations, and transparency in terms of how the fares are broken down. So those are the main issues that drivers in the Chicago market are really focused on. And we actually have an ordinance in front of City Hall that addresses those primary things. So we're focused on what we can do up until the point where this rule goes into place. That's what drivers in this city is really focused on.
So when it comes to addressing, oh yeah, Allison Dixon, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wanted to add that I think it's something important to realize is that by classifying workers as independent contractors, employers like Lyft and Uber and other platform-based employers are not required to follow any of the same federal laws or state or local laws that other employers do. So the unfair competition and advantage that kind of dynamic produces, there's no obligation to pay minimum wage, overtime, to follow any sort of sexual harassment or discrimination laws. There's no workers' comp or unemployment for these insurance. And so, workers' comp or unemployment insurance for these workers. And so, by the flexibility comes at a premium, one could say.
Lenny Sanchez, could this rule change lead to more economic security for gig workers with their wages, with benefits, and the other things that come with full-time employment?
Yeah, every worker deserves to have benefits, collective bargaining rights, etc. And regardless of what the federal government wants to do, the states have the ability to help us right now. In the state of Illinois, construction workers, I was on your show a couple months ago with Mr. Alcala, the head of the Painters Union. These are contractors that were able to maintain their contractor status, but gain collective bargaining rights and form a union. And that's what we need, and we need it today. Just like we see Starbucks, Amazon, and all these other workers unionizing, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash drivers, all of us, we need a union today, and we can do that through the state level.
J.C. Muhammad, short of that happening right now, would this rule change help at least some percentage of gig workers achieve some of those goals?
Quite possibly. I think we just have to keep in mind that, gig workers cover a large area. It's not just Uber and Lyft drivers, but it's also bookkeepers. It's also accountants. It's also people who do digital marketing. It's tutors and instructors. So it's a wide swath of people. Rideshare drivers and delivery drivers represent a subset of that. Mm-hmm. And up until the point that rule comes in place, there's a lot that we can do. So I do agree with Lenny that there are some steps we can take before we get to that point. So that's not to rule it out. It's to keep it on the table, but also to try to address some of the more pressing concerns that people who are in this industry face right now.
Well, Allison Dixon, what I wanted to ask earlier is there a law of unintended consequences here? You heard what Lenny said about talking to Uber and Lyft, that these companies, at least the rideshare portion of gig workers, might find ways to skirt these rules.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw what happened in California with
Prop 22.
And, I think that when we see such a large segment of the economy taking advantage of these, significant loopholes in the federal law, it only has wider implications for the greater economy. And I really appreciate, JC, what you said about all the other workers that are affected. This is something I see on a daily basis teaching my classes, is that misclassification, so erroneously calling somebody an independent contractor when legally they should be an employee, is a much bigger issue. And it starts with these workers who are being called independent contractors and are being treated as independent contractors, and it spreads to other industries where then an employer who's looking to save some money on their labor costs will call and treat their workers as independent contractors when there's no reason they should be.
And I should note that the Labor Secretary said that misclassification is the key reason for this rule change. He believes to stop some of that misclassifying as an independent contractor if someone should be an employee. Very interesting discussion. We have to leave it there. Our thanks to J.C. Muhammad, Allison Dixon, and Lenny Sanchez. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And up next, how to apply for Cook County's Guaranteed Income Pilot. That's in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices with Angel Ito. But first, we take a look at the weather.
According to the 2020 census, nearly 13% of Cook County residents live in poverty. That's nearly 700,000 people. Now there's a new guaranteed income pilot aimed at helping some of them stabilize their financial lives. The program, known as Cook County Promise, is accepting applications through October 21st. Now recipients will receive $500 a month in cash support for 2 years. It's the largest publicly funded guaranteed income pilot in the United States to date, and Cook County officials say they have high hopes for the program. Joining us now with more are Cook County Director of Equity and Inclusion, Denise Burrito. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
You.
So glad to be here.
Yes.
So glad to be here.
So excited to talk about this new program and how folks can get some money. So first, let's walk through the eligibility requirements. What is needed?
Well, first of all, they have to be a resident of Cook County and not participating in either the Chicago or Evanston Guaranteed Income Pilot. Other than that, it's you got to be in Cook County, have to be 18 years or older, and you have to have a household income below 250% of the federal poverty level, which is about $58,000 for a family of 3.
For a family of 3, that's good to know. Okay, right. And so then what information does the application ask for specifically in those personal details?
Well, it's very simple. It is going to be online, so that's why we have outreach centers all over, and we are hosting opportunities for people who might not have access. But it's very simple. We're not asking for immigration status. I'll start with that. We're just asking for a way to know where you are and be able to verify that income and the number of people that are in your household.
Absolutely. And so with this being an online-only application, are there ways for people who want to apply to get help submitting their applications, just kind of troubleshooting with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an outreach program that has us with partners all over the city. For example, most notably, the Spanish Coalition for Housing. So there's a lot of folks who, the Indo-American Center, lots of immigrants serving, but there's also a lot of HUD certified nonprofits that are also participating. So again, the outreach, we know that not everyone has access, and so there are folks set up throughout the county in various capacities to troubleshoot with people and make sure that they have what they need.
So let's get into the selection process. How are people chosen and how will they receive their money?
So it is random and it's a lottery. Okay, gotta let you know that, because let's just be real, 36% of the people that live in Cook County would be eligible for this. That's a big number, right? And to date, we've already had over 160,000 applicants to date. And we're talking, this is gonna be for 3,250. So clearly, we have to do it as a lottery. You know what I mean? So once we have all the information in, it's just random. We have a partner that's going to help us randomly select those 3,000 families.
And now beyond 3,000 people having the opportunity to improve their financial standing, what would a successful outcome look like for Cook County in this program?
So that's a great question. And what we're really trying to do with being the largest publicly funded is we're trying to push the federal government. Let's be real, right? This has been done on the local level in Stockton, California, parts of Ohio, Southern California, all public-private partnerships. as the second largest county in the country, this is a clarion call, right? We're basically saying, like, for us, success would be that we already know that the data has told us we want the data to be on a wider scale. When people have access to cash, this is going to save families that second job that gets eaten up with childcare and transportation. And so when someone has that extra cushion, you know, we know for a fact people are going to build nest eggs. People are going to be more stable. And the amount of people, this is the largest that we're having, and so we're hoping that it will call on the federal government because, you know, I just told you 36% of Cook County is eligible. So for us to get this in our budget long term, that's a very tough proposition, but we do believe that with our data, we're going to help bring other big counties like Harris County and Houston, LA County. Yes, I'm calling out because I think the more of us that do this, it'll drive, just like everything else, it'll be this groundswell and it'll force the federal government to look at this.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, this is an ambitious pilot. $42 million are being funded by the American Rescue Plan Act. Now, any future plans to grow and fund the program beyond this initial pilot?
Well, only time will tell. I'm happy to plug another thing that we have, which is our equity fund, and that is a special purpose fund designed for equitable spending, right? This is being paid for through our ARPA dollars, but we think of it as a down payment. And when the idea is, if we are able to do this and keep it be part of our budget, we know that we have a special purpose fund every year that we can look for longitudinal equitable investments. So if it were to happen, that's one of the places that I think this money could come from.
Now, last question, we're running out of time, but I would love to know why do you think that this program is the right approach?
Because cash is king. Like, the reality is, you know, we've had Band-Aids and initiatives throughout the years, and nothing's wrong with programs. But folks that are living in poverty are some of the most resourceful people in this country, right? And so what better way to invest in them than to directly invest in them, right? Give them the money and let them decide what to do with it. And we know that they're going to enrich their families, and this is going to make communities better, right? So anybody, any family or household that is part of this program, that's not just going to be in for them. It's going to be for the folks around them, the places that they patronize. We're really excited to see how this is going to lift the county as a whole.
Well, thank you so much for these tidbits. Our thanks to Denise Burrito. Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
Between 2000 and 2016, 6 of Chicago's suburbs flipped from majority white suburbs to majority Latino. That's a reflection of a broader trend of immigrants bypassing the historical port of entry neighborhoods in the city and settling directly in the suburbs. And as the demographics of these communities have evolved, their institutions have had to find new ways to serve and engage those residents. Producer Erica Gunderson recently checked out 2 suburban libraries to see how they're going beyond just books. Here's another look.
Mi bonita sombrero, my beautiful hat. When we have new families that are coming here for the first time, I want them to know that this is their library, this is their space.
Like all social institutions, the public library has had to evolve with the times.
People come here for passport services. People come to get their blood sugar, cholesterol screenings. People check out our library of things items, which include sewing machines or telescopes.
And as Latinos, especially immigrant Latinos, have increasingly settled in Chicago's suburbs over the years, suburban libraries have developed ways to better serve their changing communities.
We're here to help them in their language, and that we can also celebrate their cultural background as well.
At the Rounds Lake Public Library, a monthly book club offers readers the opportunity to discuss literature in their own language.
A lot of them, what they have told me is that they feel like this is an era of space and a time where they can just dedicate to themselves. We talk about the book and different point of views of everybody within the book and then in their lives, because we always find something to relate to.
Y ver que ya la biblioteca nos manda la información, toda nos la manda en español, pues a veces ese es como algo que pone uno de barrera, a veces el idioma, ¿verdad? Entonces, tener esta oportunidad en nuestra biblioteca de venir a buscar los libros muy interesantes en español, pues fue una de las cosas que más me motivó para venir.
Round Lake Library Head of Community Engagement Sandra Lopez says during the early days of the COVID pandemic, patrons increasingly turned to the library for help with problems that went far beyond the stacks.
For example, the school district became virtual. A lot of the families in the school district didn't have computers or didn't know how to use computers, and they also had a language barrier. So we had our partner over at the school district reach out to us, say, hey, can you guys help? And we developed computer classes that we were able to give to parents in need.
In West Suburban North Lake, bilingual adult reference librarian Carla Alba says the staff develops its programming based on input from the community.
That means that they are trusting us more in terms of what they ask for, and if they do need something that they don't know whether we provide it or not, they feel like that they can come in and ask for it.
North Lake Youth Services librarian Jackie Cerrone says she draws upon her own upbringing when selecting resources for the children who come to her library.
The other day I had purchased books about El Cucuy, which is like a childhood myth, that us, especially in the Mexican community, we grew up listening to, which are now in story times.
North Lake patrons Fiona Ayala and Noemi Guisar Miranda both say they began coming to the North Lake Public Library to find activities for their children. But now they keep coming back for themselves, too.
So I was born in Mexico, came here, and just recently I took my citizenship test. And the fact that they offer that program so you can study for the test, it was one of the most amazing things.
Sorprendente que en ningún lugar celebran el Día del Niño y aquí lo celebran. El Día de la Madre, el Día de los Muertos, y hacen eventos y cosas alusivas a esas tradiciones que nos hacen sentir orgullosos de nuestras raíces.
Both Ayala and Guisar Miranda say they often recommend the North Lake Library to friends and family, which librarians say is key to building trust in the community.
A lot of the time we feel that patrons will come in because they've talked to a family member or a friend.
It just makes me feel great that there is a place where you can feel comfortable, if there's people that are still willing to help you out when you know you need the help. And it's a library like a place that I never would have expected.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
Everybody knows head, shoulders, knees, and toes. You'll find more about the libraries you just saw on our website. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. You can also get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. With low turnout for COVID-19 booster shots, can we expect a surge in variant cases this winter? We're one-on-one with Chicago's top doctor.
And Cook County voters face a choice on raising taxes a fraction of a percent to bolster the forest preserves. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.